May 1985. In a remote research station in Antarctica, a team of British scientists stare at their data, unable to believe what they're seeing. Above them, high in the stratosphere, a vast, invisible shield that protects all life on Earth is vanishing. A hole, larger than the continent they stand on, has opened in the ozone layer. This isn't a slow, gradual change. It's a catastrophic collapse. The discovery sends a shockwave through the scientific community and will soon force humanity to confront a terrifying possibility that our modern way of life is destroying the very air we breathe. This is the story of how we almost broke our planet and how, against all odds, we came together to fix it. To understand the crisis of 1985, we need to go back a few decades. The post-war world was a time of incredible optimism and technological progress. Homes were being filled with miraculous new appliances, like refrigerators and air conditioners. Aerosol spray cans made everything from hairspray to paint instantly convenient. The magic ingredient behind many of these innovations was a class of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. They were hailed as a triumph of modern chemistry, non-toxic, non-flammable, and incredibly stable. They were considered perfectly safe. So safe, in fact, that their inventor once inhaled a lungful and blew out a candle to prove his point. Production of CFCs exploded worldwide. Nobody knew that these wonder chemicals were slowly accumulating in the atmosphere, embarking on a decades-long journey up to the stratosphere. In 1974, two chemists from the University of California, Irvine Mario Molina and Sherwood Rowland, published a paper that should have stopped the world in its tracks. Their research was purely theoretical, but their conclusion was chilling. They proposed that the incredibly stable CFCs, once they reached the upper atmosphere, would be broken apart by intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun. This process would release chlorine atoms. A single chlorine atom, they calculated, could act as a catalyst, setting off a chain reaction that could destroy tens of thousands of ozone molecules. Ozone is the thin layer of gas that absorbs the sun's most harmful UVB radiation. Without it, life on Earth would be exposed to radiation levels that cause skin cancer, cataracts, and widespread damage to crops and marine ecosystems. The chemical industry, which had built a multi-billion-dollar empire on science, reacted with fury. They dismissed Molina and Rowland's theory as science fiction. They launched a massive public relations campaign to discredit the scientists, calling them alarmists and enemies of progress. For years, the debate was stuck in a stalemate. The theory was compelling, but there was no concrete proof. No one had actually observed this ozone destruction happening in the real world. Scientists were flying weather balloons and rockets into the stratosphere, but the data was inconclusive. The world continued to pump millions of tons of CFCs into the air every year, while the scientific community remained deeply divided. Rowland and Molina stood by their work, but the pressure was immense. They were scientists, not public figures, and they were fighting a lonely battle against powerful corporate interests. Everything changed at Halley Bay, Antarctica. Since the 1950s, a team from the British Antarctic Survey had been dutifully measuring ozone levels above the pole. For decades, the readings were consistent and unremarkable. But starting in the late 1970s, their instruments began showing bizarrely low numbers every spring. At first, the lead scientist, Joe Farman, suspected his equipment was faulty. The readings were so low, they seemed impossible. He even ordered a brand new spectrometer, but when it arrived, it showed the same alarming results. The ozone levels in the Antarctic spring were plummeting. By 1984, the layer was over a third thinner than it had been just a decade earlier. Farman and his team knew they were sitting on something huge, but they hesitated. They were geophysicists, not chemists, and they knew their findings would be explosive. They spent months rechecking their data, ruling out every other possible explanation. Finally, in May 1985, they published their findings in the journal Nature. The paper was concise, clinical, and utterly devastating. It was the smoking gun. It wasn't just a theory anymore. The ozone layer was being destroyed, and it was happening much faster and more dramatically than anyone, even Molina and Rowland, had ever predicted. The news of the ozone hole ignited a global firestorm. The term itself, simple and terrifying, captured the public's imagination. News reports were filled with images of a gaping void over the South Pole, a stark symbol of humanity's impact on the planet. Suddenly, the threat was no longer abstract. It was real, it was measurable, and it was directly above us. The discovery created a level of public anxiety not seen since the height of the Cold War. People worried about going outside. Sales of sunscreen and sunglasses skyrocketed. The pressure on governments and corporations became unbearable. The chemical industry's arguments crumbled in the face of hard evidence. Denying the problem was no longer an option. The global response was remarkably swift. Science, for a moment, transcended politics. World leaders, who were often at odds on almost every other issue, recognized a shared existential threat. The United Nations Environment Program took the lead, convening a series of urgent international meetings. The goal was to forge a global treaty to phase out the chemicals responsible for the damage. The negotiations were intense. Developing countries argued they shouldn't have to sacrifice their economic growth for a problem largely created by the industrialized world. Corporations fought to protect their investments and argued for a slower transition. But the stark images from Antarctica and the unified voice of the scientific community kept the pressure on. In September 1987, just 2 years after the hole was confirmed, a landmark agreement was reached. In Canada, nations from around the world signed the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. It was an unprecedented piece of international law. It didn't just recommend action. It mandated a legally binding phase-out of CFCs and other ozone-depleting substances. It was designed to be adaptable, with provisions to tighten restrictions as more scientific evidence became available. The Montreal Protocol is now widely considered the most successful environmental treaty in history. It proved that the world could unite to solve a global crisis. It set a powerful precedent, showing that when science, public pressure, and political will align, humanity can achieve the seemingly impossible. The impact was immediate and profound. Industries that had once fought the change were now forced to innovate. They invested billions in developing alternatives to CFCs. New refrigerants and propellants were created that were safe for the ozone layer. Within a decade, the production and consumption of the most harmful chemicals had dropped by over 90%. The results in the atmosphere were not as quick, however. Because CFCs are so long-lived, the damage would continue for decades. The ozone hole reached its largest size in the year 2000. But slowly, painstakingly, the planet began to heal. Scientists monitoring the stratosphere started to see the first signs of recovery. The decline in ozone stopped, and then very gradually, the layer began to thicken again. Today, the ozone layer is on a slow but steady path to recovery. It is projected to return to its pre-1980 levels by the middle of this century. It's a quiet victory, happening miles above our heads, but it's one of the greatest environmental success stories of our time. But here's a little-known detail that changes the perspective on this story. When the British team first detected the massive ozone drop, they weren't the only ones looking. NASA had a satellite, the Nimbus 7, which had been monitoring global ozone levels for years. So why didn't NASA discover the hole first? The answer is both simple and unsettling. The satellite's computers had been programmed to automatically discard any ozone readings that were so low they were considered errors or outliers. The data showing the hole's formation was being collected, but the algorithm was flagging it as impossible and throwing it away. It was only after the British team published their ground-based findings that NASA scientists went back and reprocessed their raw data. When they did, they saw it plain as day, a massive, growing hole that their own systems had been programmed to ignore because the truth was too extreme to seem real. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't a lack of information, but a failure to see what's right in front of us. The story of the ozone hole is more than just a chapter in an environmental science textbook. It's a blueprint for action. It's a story about the power of scientific curiosity, the courage to speak truth to power, and the incredible things humanity can accomplish when we choose cooperation over conflict. It reminds us that our planet is resilient but also fragile, and it teaches us that the problems we create can also be the problems we solve. As we face the even greater environmental challenges of the 21st century, the heroes of the ozone story, the scientists, the diplomats, and the citizens who demanded action offer a powerful legacy of hope. Their success poses a critical question for our generation. If we did it once, can we do it again? If you want to explore more pivotal moments from the 1980s that still shape our world today, make sure to subscribe. We have many more stories to tell.